My hands shake as I apply the third coat of mascara, and I wonder if this is what desperation looks like at 63. The bathroom mirror reflects back a woman I'm still getting used to. Silver hair that I finally stopped coloring, laugh lines that have deepened into permanent fixtures, and eyes that hold more stories than I know what to do with. Margaret insisted I try this dating app for mature adults, and after 18 months of widowhood, I finally caved. The restaurant she chose is one of those mid-tier chains where the lighting is forgiving and the portions are reasonable. Perfect for first dates between people who've already lived most of their lives, she said. I arrived 15 minutes early because punctuality was drilled into me by a mother who believed tardiness was a character flaw, and because I need time to steady my nerves with a glass of wine. The hostess, barely out of college with that dewy skin that makes me remember when my biggest concern was whether my lipstick matched my dress, seats me at a corner booth. I chose this spot deliberately, back to the wall, clear view of the entrance, easy escape route to the ladies' room if needed. 43 years of marriage to Robert taught me the importance of strategic positioning, though he would have laughed at applying military tactics to a blind date. I smoothed my navy dress, the one my daughter Sarah helped me pick out during our last shopping trip. "Mom, you need to show them you're still alive," she'd said, holding up options that seemed designed for women half my age. This one feels like me, classic, comfortable, with just enough neckline to suggest I haven't given up entirely. The wine arrives, and I take a sip larger than polite society would approve of. My phone buzzes with a text from Margaret. "Remember, no talk about Robert on the first date. Men don't want to compete with ghosts." Easy for her to say. She's been divorced for 10 years and dates like it's a part-time job. I've loved one man for most of my adult life, buried him 8 months ago, and now I'm supposed to make small talk with a stranger about the weather and my hobbies. The entrance door chimes, and I look up to see him scanning the restaurant. David, 71, retired engineer, 2 grown children, enjoys hiking and classical music. His profile photo showed a distinguished man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, silver beard neatly trimmed, wearing a button-down shirt that suggested he still cared about appearances. The man walking toward my table matches the description, mostly. He's shorter than I expected, with a slight stoop that speaks of decades bent over blueprints or computer screens. But his smile seems genuine as he approaches, and he's wearing a tie, which shows effort. "Eleanor?" His voice carries a slight rasp, probably from years of explaining complex concepts to colleagues who didn't want to listen. "I'm David. Thank you for meeting me." I stand to shake his hand, grateful for the wine's calming influence, and notice he smells like aftershave and coffee, safe, familiar scents that remind me of Saturday mornings with Robert. "Please sit. I took the liberty of ordering wine. I hope that's not presumptuous." He settles across from me with the careful movements of a man who's learned to negotiate with his body. Not at all. I could use some liquid courage myself. His admission surprises me. I'd assumed men his age would have this dating thing figured out by now. The server appears with practiced efficiency, reciting specials I don't hear because I'm too busy studying David's hands. They're well-maintained, no wedding ring line visible, nails clean and trimmed. Robert's hands were always stained with something: paint, soil from the garden, ink from his fountain pen. These hands look like they've spent their life indoors, solving problems on paper rather than with tools. "The salmon looks good," David says, closing his menu with decision. I admire that. Robert used to agonize over restaurant choices like he was planning a military campaign. "I'll have the chicken," I tell the server, because it's safe and unlikely to get stuck in my teeth or require complicated knife work. First date dining is a minefield of potential embarrassments. "So," David says, folding his hands on the table, "Margaret tells me you're recently widowed. I'm sorry for your loss." There it is, the elephant dressed in black, sitting at our table. I take another sip of wine and decide on honesty. "Thank you. It's been an adjustment." Margaret thought it was time I got back out there, as she puts it. Margaret has strong opinions about what everyone should be doing with their lives. His smile suggests personal experience with her matchmaking efforts. She introduced me to my last girlfriend 2 years ago, lasted 6 months before we both realized we were better as friends. I feel a small knot of tension release. He's done this before, survived it, learned from it. Maybe I'm not as pathetically inexperienced as I feel. How long have you been back out there? 5 years, give or take. My wife passed from cancer in 2019. Took me a while to figure out who I was without her. He pauses to sip his wine, and I notice he chose red while I went with white. Robert always said that revealed fundamental personality differences, though I never understood his theory. The food arrives with restaurant timing, perfectly adequate and slightly disappointing. David cuts his salmon with surgical precision, while I pick at my chicken and wonder what we're supposed to talk about for the next hour. Our children? Too personal for a first meeting. Our health issues? Too depressing. Current events? Too risky in today's climate. Tell me about the hiking, I say, seizing on the safest topic from his profile. His face lights up, and for the first time, I see the man behind the careful first date persona. I started after Helen died. Needed something to get me out of the house, you know? Started with local trails, nothing too ambitious. Last month, I did a section of the Appalachian Trail with my son. Took us 3 days, and I thought I might die on the second day. But he shrugs, embarrassed by his own enthusiasm. But you didn't, I finish. That's something. What about you? Any grand adventures since your husband passed? I almost laugh at the question. Grand adventures? I've barely managed to grocery shop without crying in the cereal aisle. I joined a book club, I say, then immediately feel foolish for such a mundane answer. What are you reading? This month, it's The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I'm discovering I have strong opinions about fictional characters' romantic choices. The wine is making me more honest than intended. David laughs, and the sound is warm and genuine. I read that one last year. Evelyn reminded me of my mother. Beautiful, complicated, and absolutely certain she knew what was best for everyone. We fall into an easier rhythm after that, trading stories about demanding parents and stubborn children, comparing notes on the challenges of dating apps designed by people who think anyone over 50 has forgotten how technology works. David tells me about his attempts at online dating profiles, how his daughter had to explain why a bathroom selfie wasn't appropriate. I share Margaret's coaching sessions on how to present my best self while remaining authentic, whatever that means. The conversation flows better than I expected, lubricated by wine and the relief of finding someone who understands the particular awkwardness of starting over at our age. David isn't Robert, but he doesn't try to be. He's thoughtful without being overly serious, funny without working too hard for laughs. When he mentions his grandchildren, his whole demeanor softens, and I can see glimpses of the man he must have been as a father. "Can I ask you something?" David says as we're finishing our entrees. His tone has shifted, become more serious. "What made you decide to try this? The dating, I mean." I consider giving him the easy answer that Margaret wore me down, that I was lonely, that I needed to get back out there. Instead, I find myself telling him the truth. I was at the grocery store last week, buying ingredients for dinner. For one, I've been married for 43 years, and I still automatically reach for the family-size packages. I stood there in the pasta aisle and realized I didn't know how to shop for just myself. It felt pathetic and profound at the same time. David nods like he understands completely. I still set 2 coffee cups out every morning. Helen always had hers first, black with 1 sugar. I'd make mine while she read the paper and told me which stories I needed to care about that day. He pauses, his fork suspended over the remaining salmon. My daughter says I need to break the habit, but some routines feel too important to abandon. The honesty in his voice catches me off guard. This is what I didn't expect. that grief might be something we could share instead of something I needed to hide. Robert used to leave coffee for me every morning before he went to work. Perfect temperature, extra cream. I haven't had a good cup of coffee since he died because I never learned how he made it just right. I could teach you, David says quietly, if you'd like. I've had years of practice. The offer hangs between us, simple and loaded with implications. Coffee lessons could be just coffee lessons, or they could be something more. I'm not sure I'm ready for something more, but the thought of good coffee again is surprisingly tempting. The server appears with dessert menus, and David orders creme brulee while I choose chocolate cake because life is too short to pretend I don't want dessert. We share bites of each other's choices like teenagers, and I realize I'm actually enjoying myself. The nervous energy that carried me through the first half of dinner has settled into something more comfortable. I have a confession, David says as he scrapes the last bit of caramelized sugar from his ramekin. I've been dreading this all week. Margaret made it sound like you were some sort of superhuman widow who had everything figured out. I was worried I'd bore you to tears with my amateur hiking stories and my inability to figure out Netflix. I nearly choke on my wine. Margaret told you I had everything figured out? I called her crying yesterday because I couldn't remember how to program the coffee maker timer. The admission slips out before I can stop it, and I feel heat rise to my cheeks. David's laugh is delighted and relieved. She told me you were handling your transition beautifully and embracing new challenges with grace. I spent the last 3 days wondering what was wrong with me, that I still have days when I eat cereal for dinner and binge watch old episodes of Jeopardy. Margaret has a gift for creative interpretation of reality, I say, feeling the last of my first date armor dissolve. Last week, I locked myself out of my house and had to call my neighbor to help me break into my own kitchen window. Very graceful. We're both laughing now, and I realize this is what I missed most about companionship. Not just having someone to talk to, but having someone laugh with me instead of at me. Robert and I had developed our own language of shared jokes and references over 4 decades together. I'd assumed that kind of easy communication was impossible to recreate, but maybe it just takes a different form. The bill arrives, and David reaches for it immediately. "Please, let me. I asked you out." "Actually, Margaret asked me out on your behalf, and I said yes on mine," I correct him. "We can split it." He considers this logic and nods. "Fair enough, though I reserve the right to buy you coffee when I teach you the proper brewing technique." When I did, you assume there would be coffee lessons? The question hovers on my tongue, but his presumption doesn't annoy me the way it should. Instead, it feels like hope that this evening might lead to another, that I might not have to navigate the rest of my life entirely alone. We walk to the parking lot together, moving slowly because neither of us is in a hurry for the evening to end. David's car is a sensible sedan, clean and well-maintained, with a hiking stick visible in the back seat and what looks like a chess set on the dashboard. Details that suggest a man who keeps his life organized but still makes room for recreation and strategy. I start, then realize I don't know how to finish the sentence. Nice, pleasant, better than expected? All of those feel inadequate. Surprisingly not terrible, David offers with a self-deprecating smile. I was going to say unexpectedly comfortable, but your version works too. He pulls out his phone, one of those large-screen models designed for people who've accepted that their eyesight isn't what it used to be. "Would it be presumptuous of me to ask for your number for the coffee lessons, if nothing else?" I give him my number, and he calls it immediately, so I have his. The exchange feels both casual and monumental. The first time I've given my phone number to a man who isn't a family member or service provider since I was 20 years old. Thank you for taking a chance on me, David, as we stand beside my car. And thank Margaret for her creative matchmaking techniques. I laugh. I'll thank her for mine, too, though I may also have some words about her tendency to embellish our emotional states. He leans in to kiss my cheek, a gesture so gentle and old-fashioned that it catches me completely off guard. His lips are warm and brief against my skin, and for just a moment, I remember what it felt like to be touched with affection instead of sympathy. Driving home, I feel something I haven't experienced in months, anticipation for what might come next. Not love, not yet, maybe not ever, but the possibility of companionship, of someone to share coffee and conversation with, someone who understands what it means to start over when you thought your story was already written. My phone buzzes with a text from David before I'm even home. "Thank you for a lovely evening. I'll call you tomorrow about those coffee lessons. Sleep well, Eleanor." I text back, "Thank you. I look forward to learning something new." It's not until I'm brushing my teeth that I realize I haven't thought about Robert once in the last hour. The guilt hits me like a wave. How dare I forget him, even temporarily? How dare I enjoy another man's company when my husband has been gone less than 2 years? But then I remember something he said during his final weeks, when the cancer had stolen his strength but not his clarity. "Ellie, promise me you won't spend the rest of your life mourning me. I want you to find reasons to laugh again." Maybe David isn't about replacing what I had with Robert. Maybe he's about discovering what I might have now, in this unexpected chapter of my life. The thought terrifies and excites me in equal measure. I wake up the next morning with a text from David waiting for me. "Good morning, Eleanor. I hope you slept well. Would Saturday afternoon work for Coffee Brewing 101? I promise to grade on a curve." I stare at the message for a full minute, coffee cup in hand, the weak, disappointing coffee that's been my morning companion for 8 months. Saturday is 3 days away. 3 days to talk myself out of this, to remember all the reasons why dating at my age is ridiculous, to retreat back into the safety of my widow's grief. Instead, I type back, "Saturday sounds perfect. Fair warning, I'm a terrible student when it comes to anything involving precise measurements." His response comes in precise measurements. It's what makes cooking an art instead of a science. See you at 2? See you at 2. I spend the rest of the morning doing ordinary things, laundry, grocery shopping, calling my daughter to check on the grandchildren. But everything feels slightly different, like I'm seeing my life through a new filter. At the grocery store, I find myself in the coffee aisle, studying the bags of whole beans that Robert always bought, wondering what David's preferences are. Do I buy coffee for Saturday's lesson, or would that seem presumptuous? How much planning ahead is appropriate for coffee lessons with a man I've had one dinner with? The questions feel absurdly complicated and delightfully normal at the same time. Margaret calls while I'm folding laundry, barely waiting for me to answer before launching into her interrogation. "Well, how did it go?" "David texted me this morning to thank me for the introduction, which is a good sign. He only does that when he's actually interested." It was, I pause, searching for words that will satisfy her curiosity without revealing too much. "Nice, comfortable. We're having coffee on Saturday." Coffee on Saturday! Margaret's triumph is audible through the phone. "I knew you two would hit it off. David's a good man, Eleanor. Stable, kind, financially secure. Helen was lucky to have him for 35 years. "Margaret," I interrupt gently, "it's coffee lessons, not a marriage proposal. I'm just learning how to make proper coffee." "Oh, honey," she laughs. "No man teaches a woman how to make coffee unless he's planning to drink it with her regularly. Trust me on this." After she hangs up, I sit with her words. Is that what David's doing? Planning for regular coffee consumption? The thought should overwhelm me, but instead it settles somewhere warm in my chest, like a small flame I'm not quite ready to acknowledge, but don't want to extinguish either. Thursday passes quietly, filled with the routines that have become my life structure. Morning walk, afternoon reading, evening phone call with Sarah, who lives 3 states away and worries about me constantly. I don't mention David. Sarah has been gently suggesting I get out more for months, but she's also protective of her father's memory, in ways that make new relationships feel like betrayal. Friday brings rain and second thoughts. I stand at my bedroom window, watching water streak down the glass, and wonder what I'm doing. Robert and I met in college, married young, grew up together. I don't know how to date as a senior citizen. I don't know the rules, the expectations, the timeline for physical affection or emotional intimacy. At 20, dating felt natural, instinctive. At 63, it feels like learning a foreign language without a dictionary. My neighbor Helen, not David's late wife, but my across-the-street Helen who's been divorced for 15 years, stops by with a casserole and unsolicited advice. She's one of those women who's turned single living into an art form, with her perfectly decorated house and her active social calendar, and her certainty that independence is the highest form of self-actualization. Dating at our age is different, she says, settling into my kitchen with tea and the casual authority of someone who's navigated these waters successfully. You don't have to worry about biological clocks or impressing anyone's parents. You can just focus on enjoying yourself. What if I don't remember how to enjoy myself with someone new? Helen studies me with the directness of someone who's known me for 8 years. Eleanor, you spent 4 decades making Robert happy. Maybe it's time to figure out what makes you happy. The question stays with me after she leaves. What does make me happy? For so long, happiness was tied to Robert's contentment, to our children's successes, to the smooth functioning of our family unit. I've been a wife and mother for so long that I'm not sure who I am outside those roles. Maybe that's what terrifies me about David. Not that he might hurt me or disappoint me, but that he might expect me to know myself in ways I've never had to explore. Saturday morning arrives gray and drizzly, perfect weather for staying inside and learning about coffee. I change clothes 3 times, finally settling on jeans and a soft blue sweater that Sarah gave me for Christmas. Casual but not sloppy, pretty but not trying too hard. I arrive at David's house 5 minutes early and sit in my car, gathering courage. His house is a modest ranch style in an established neighborhood with a well-maintained yard and practical landscaping. No flowers, but neat shrubs and a small vegetable garden visible in the backyard. The front door is painting navy blue, and there's a bench on the porch with a hiking magazine left open on it. Details that suggest a man who takes care of what's his without needing to impress anyone. David answers the door wearing khakis and a flannel shirt, looking more relaxed than he did at the restaurant. His kitchen is clean and organized, with good knives and a coffee setup that looks more complicated than anything I've ever owned. There are photos on the refrigerator, grandchildren, I assume, and a wedding picture that must be Helen. She was beautiful, blonde and smiling, with the kind of confidence I've always envied in other women. "Welcome to my kingdom," David says, gesturing toward the coffee station. Fair warning, I take this seriously. Helen used to say I was more passionate about coffee than I was about most people. He shows me his equipment, a burr grinder, a scale, a French press, and something called a pour-over dripper that looks like laboratory equipment. I watch his hands as he demonstrates, the careful way he measures beans and times the brewing process. There's something meditative about his precision, something that reminds me why Robert loved his woodworking shop, the satisfaction of doing something exactly right. The key is ratio, David explains, watching me attempt to grind beans with appropriate coarseness. Coffee to water, time to temperature. Get those right and everything else is forgivable. I'm terrible at it, of course. My first attempt produces coffee that's too weak, my second too strong. David doesn't laugh at my failures, just adjusts my technique and encourages me to try again. His patience reminds me of Robert teaching our children to ride bikes. The same gentle persistence, the same faith that eventually competence will emerge from chaos. "Better," he says, tasting my third attempt. "You're getting the feel for it." We sit at his kitchen table with our imperfect coffee, and I study the photos on his refrigerator more carefully. "Tell me about Helen," I say, surprising myself with the directness of the question. David follows my gaze and smiles. She was a force of nature. High school English teacher for 30 years, department head for the last 10. She could make teenagers care about Shakespeare, which I always thought was close to a miracle. Very organized, very opinionated, very sure of herself. Do you miss her? Every day, but differently now than I did 2 years ago. Then it was this raw grief that colored everything gray. Now it's more like missing a limb you've learned to function without. I'll always miss her, but I'm not drowning in it anymore. I nod, understanding completely. Robert was a math teacher, high school, then community college. He could explain calculus to anyone, make the most complicated concepts seem simple. I miss his brain almost as much as I miss his physical presence. What was he like, as a person, I mean? The question catches me off guard. No one asks about Robert anymore. People either avoid mentioning him entirely, or they speak in the reverent tones reserved for the sainted dead. David's question sounds genuinely curious, like he wants to know about the man I loved rather than the saint I lost. Stubborn, I say, then laugh at David's surprised expression. Everyone talks about how patient and kind he was, and he was both those things. But he was also impossibly stubborn about the strangest things. He insisted on washing dishes by hand because he didn't trust dishwashers. He refused to use GPS because he claimed he had a better sense of direction, even though he got us lost constantly. He would only buy cars with manual transmissions because he said automatics made people lazy drivers. David grins. Helen was the same way about technology. Refused to learn how to use the remote control for our TV, claimed it was unnecessarily complicated. I had to program all her shows for her, even though she could explain the themes in Hamlet to a room full of 16-year-olds. We trade stories about our spouses' quirks and obsessions, their failures and frustrations, the small irritations that become endearing only in retrospect. It feels good to remember Robert as a complete human being instead of a perfect memory. David listens without trying to fix or minimize my grief, and I do the same for his. Can I ask you something? David says as we're finishing our second cups of coffee. What made you say yes to meeting me? Not the Margaret pressure, but really, what made you willing to try this? I consider the question seriously. I realized I was disappearing, not dying, just fading away. I'd go whole days without speaking to another adult, whole weeks without anyone seeing me as anything other than Robert's widow or Sarah's mother. I started to feel invisible, like I only existed in relation to other people. The dating wasn't about finding love, really. It was about finding out if I still existed as an individual person. David nods slowly. I know that feeling. After Helen died, I felt like half of a conversation, like a question without an answer. Dating was partly about loneliness, but mostly about learning how to be a complete person again instead of half of a couple. Are you a complete person again? He considers this, studying his coffee cup like it might hold the answer. Most days. Some days I still feel like I'm playing a role. The confident widower who's moved on, the available man who knows what he wants. But sitting here with you, right now, I feel like myself. David, not Helen's husband or the grandfather or the guy from the dating app, just David. The admission touches something deep in my chest. I feel like Eleanor here too. Not the Eleanor who's failing at single life, but the Eleanor who might be interested in learning something new. We finish the coffee lesson with more success than failure, and David sends me home with a bag of his preferred beans and written instructions for proper brewing technique. His handwriting is neat and precise, like an engineer's, with little notes in the margins about timing and temperature. Thank you, I say at his front door, and I mean for more than just the coffee education. Thank you for letting me teach you something, he replies. I'd forgotten how nice it feels to be useful to someone. Driving home, I realize I'm humming, something I haven't done since Robert got sick. The melody is nothing I recognize, just a wordless expression of contentment that rises from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. I feel proud of myself for grinding coffee beans successfully, for asking direct questions, for spending 3 hours with a man without once wishing I was somewhere else. That evening, I make coffee using David's instructions. It's not perfect, but it's better than anything I've managed in months. I call Margaret to report on the lesson, keeping the details light but letting my satisfaction show through. Coffee lessons, Margaret says with knowing amusement. What's next? Hiking lessons? Cooking lessons? Dancing lessons? One step at a time, Margaret. One step at a time. But as I sit in my kitchen, drinking properly brewed coffee and watching the evening light fade through my windows, I find myself wondering what other lessons I might be willing to learn. David calls me Tuesday evening while I'm reading, and the sound of his name on my caller ID gives me a small jolt of pleasure that I'm not quite ready to examine too closely. "How's the coffee coming along?" he asks, and I can hear the smile in his voice. "Better, still not perfect, but definitely drinkable. My daughter called yesterday and commented that I sounded more cheerful. I told her I'd finally figured out how to make good coffee." And she believed that explanation? I laugh. Sarah's a smart woman. She didn't push, but I suspect she knows there's more to the story. "Speaking of stories," David says, and his tone shifts slightly, becomes more serious. "I have a confession. I may have been less than completely honest about something when we had dinner." My stomach drops. Here it comes. The secret wife, the financial problems, the terminal illness, whatever revelation explains why a seemingly decent man is available for blind dates at 71. What kind of confession? "I told you I'd been hiking for 5 years since Helen died. That's not exactly true." I wait, holding my breath. "I started hiking 23 years ago when Helen was first diagnosed with breast cancer. She had surgery and chemo, and the doctors said she was fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was fragile, that I needed to get stronger somehow. So I started walking, then hiking, then taking longer and longer trips into the mountains." "David, let me finish, please. Helen thought I was crazy, hiking alone at my age, but she understood why I needed to do it. When the cancer came back 5 years ago, I hiked more. When she was getting treatment, I'd drive to the mountains afterward and walk until my legs gave out. It wasn't about getting away from her. It was about finding something solid when everything else felt like it was dissolving." I can hear the emotion in his voice, the careful control of someone who's learned to manage grief without being managed by it. "Why didn't you tell me this at dinner?" "Because I was afraid you'd think I was some kind of emotional wreck who used physical challenges to avoid dealing with his feelings. I didn't want you to see me as broken." The honesty in his admission makes my chest tight. "David, I don't think you're broken. I think you found a way to survive something terrible. That's not weakness, that's strength." "I wanted you to know because—" He pauses, and I can imagine him gathering his thoughts the way he did over dinner, careful and deliberate. "Because I'd like to see you again, and I want you to know who you're spending time with. I'm not the casual recreational hiker I pretended to be. I'm someone who disappears into the mountains when life gets too complicated to handle any other way. Are you warning me off or inviting me in?" The question hangs between us for a moment before he laughs, low and warm. I'm not sure I know the difference anymore. "Would you like to have dinner again?" I ask, surprising myself with my directness, this time without any pretense about casual hiking or emotional equilibrium. I would like that very much. We make plans for Friday night, a small Italian place David knows that's quiet enough for real conversation. After we hang up, I sit in my reading chair with my book forgotten in my lap, thinking about honesty and pretense and the courage it takes to show someone your actual self instead of the version you think they want to see. I call Sarah that night, something I almost never do on weeknights. "Mom, is everything okay?" She sounds alarmed, and I realize how rarely I call her just to talk. Everything's fine, sweetheart. I wanted to hear your voice. Okay. I can hear her settling in, switching from crisis mode to conversation mode. How are you doing? Really doing, not the polite answer you give when people ask. The question catches me off guard with its perceptive directness. Different than I was 6 months ago. Not better exactly, but not the same kind of lost either. Different how? I consider how much to tell her, how much she's ready to hear about her mother's tentative steps back into the world of companionship. I've been spending some time with a friend, a male friend, someone Margaret introduced me to. Silence stretches between us, and I can feel Sarah processing this information, weighing her protective instincts against her desire for my happiness. Tell me about him. So I do. I tell her about David's engineering background and his hiking, about his patience with coffee lessons and his honesty about grief. I don't tell her about the way his laugh makes something warm unfurl in my chest, or how his kiss on my cheek lingered in my memory for days. Some details are too new, too fragile to share, even with my daughter. He sounds nice, Mom. Stable. Dad would have liked that you're not rushing into anything. The mention of Robert's approval catches me off guard, brings tears to my eyes that I didn't expect. You think so? I know so. Dad worried about you being alone more than he worried about dying. He made me promise to make sure you didn't retreat from life entirely. Sarah's voice softens. I think he'd be glad to know you're learning how to make good coffee again. After we hang up, I realize that Sarah has given me something I didn't know I needed, permission to move forward without betraying Robert's memory. The relief is overwhelming. Friday arrives clear and cold, perfect weather for a dinner date that feels less like an audition and more like a choice. I dress carefully, but without the anxiety that marked our first meeting. Dark pants, a green silk blouse that brings out my eyes, jewelry that Robert bought me for our 40th anniversary because it feels right to carry some part of our love forward into whatever this is becoming. David picks me up this time, arriving at my door with flowers, not roses, which would feel too romantic, but mixed daisies and mums that suggest thoughtfulness without overwhelming pressure. He's wearing a sweater I haven't seen before, deep blue wool that makes his silver hair look distinguished instead of old. You look lovely, he says, and the compliment feels genuine rather than obligatory. Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself. The restaurant is exactly what he promised. Small, family-owned, with checkered tablecloths and the kind of authentic Italian atmosphere that can't be manufactured by corporate designers. The owner greets David by name, and I realize he's a regular here, not just someone who looked up romantic dinner spots online. I come here when I want to feel like I'm having dinner at someone's house instead of in a restaurant, David explains as we're seated at a corner table. The food is simple, but everything is made from scratch. We order wine, red this time at David's suggestion, and settle into conversation that feels easier than it did 2 weeks ago. David asks about my book club, and I find myself telling him about our debates over fictional characters' motivations, how passionate we get about books that no one else we know has even heard of. What's your book club reading next month? The Midnight Library. It's about a woman who gets to explore all the different lives she might have lived. The premise terrifies and fascinates me in equal measure. Why terrifies? I sip my wine and consider how to answer honestly. Because I'm 63 years old, and I'm just now realizing how many choices I made without really thinking about them. I married Robert because I loved him, but also because it was expected, because it was what good girls did in 1980. I had children because we wanted them, but also because that was the next step in the life script I'd been handed. I'm not saying I regret those choices. I don't, not for a moment. But I wonder sometimes what other versions of Eleanor might have existed if I'd been braver, more deliberate about creating my own path. David nods thoughtfully. Helen and I talked about that during her final months. She said she wished she'd traveled more when we were younger, taken more risks with her career. Not because she was unhappy with what we built together, but because she wondered about the roads not taken. Do you ever think about those other versions of yourself? All the time since she died. That's part of what the hiking is about. Not just processing grief, but figuring out who David is when he's not half of David and Helen. He pauses to taste the wine the server has brought. Sometimes I think that's why dating at our age is so complicated. We're not just getting to know each other, we're getting to know ourselves as individuals again. Our food arrives. Osso buco for him, chicken piccata for me, and we eat slowly, savoring both the meal and the conversation. I tell him about my marriage to Robert, the good years and the difficult ones, the way we learn to navigate each other's quirks and grow together instead of apart. He shares stories about Helen's battle with depression in her 40s, how they almost divorced during her worst period, but found their way back to each other through counseling and patience. People always want to romanticize long marriages, David says, cutting his meat with the same precision he applies to coffee brewing. They assume 40 years together means 40 years of happiness, but the truth is more complicated. Robert and I had 3 really difficult years in our early 30s. We'd stopped talking about anything except logistics, whose turn to pick up groceries, whether we could afford a vacation, when to schedule the kids' dental appointments. We were like efficient roommates who shared a bed but not much else. What changed? We went to counseling. Robert hated every minute of it, but he went because I told him our marriage was dying and I wasn't willing to let it happen without a fight. I smile at the memory. The therapist made us do this exercise where we had to have one conversation every day about something other than household management, politics, books, dreams, anything. It felt artificial at first, but slowly we remembered how to be curious about each other again. That takes courage, admitting when something isn't working and fighting to fix it instead of just accepting the decline. I think that's what I'm doing now, in a different way, admitting that my life isn't working the way it is and fighting to build something new instead of just accepting that my best years are behind me. David reaches across the table and covers my hand with his, just briefly, but the contact sends warmth up my arm. I don't think your best years are behind you, Eleanor. Different, maybe, but not worse. The gesture is simple, natural, but it's the first time he's touched me deliberately, and I'm surprised by how right it feels. Not like Robert's touch, which was familiar and comfortable after decades of marriage, but not wrong either. Just different, new, full of possibility I'm not sure I'm ready to explore. Can I ask you something personal? I say as we're sharing tiramisu, because the wine has made me brave and the evening has made me curious. After my confession about emotional hiking, I think all topics are fair game. Are you lonely? I mean, day to day, when you're not having dinner with confused widows or teaching coffee brewing techniques. David considers the question seriously, the way he seems to consider everything. Yes and no. I'm alone more than I'm lonely, if that makes sense. I've learned to enjoy my own company in ways I never did when I was married. But there are moments when I see something funny and want to share it with someone, when I accomplish something small and want someone to be proud of me, when I wake up from a bad dream and the bed feels too big, when being alone becomes loneliness. I nod, understanding completely. That's exactly right. I can go days being perfectly content with my solitude, reading and gardening and managing my life independently. But then something will happen. I'll see a movie that reminds me of Robert, or I'll cook a meal that turns out particularly well, and I'll want to share it with someone who knows me well enough to understand why it matters. Is that what you're looking for? Someone to share the small moments with? The question hangs between us, loaded with implications about what this is becoming, what we might want from each other. I don't know yet, I say honestly. 6 months ago, I couldn't imagine wanting companionship with anyone other than Robert. 3 months ago, I couldn't imagine surviving a dinner with a stranger. Tonight, I'm wondering what it might be like to have someone to call when something good happens. I'd like to be that person, David says quietly. if you're willing to let me try. The offer is gentle, without pressure, but it shifts something fundamental between us. We're no longer just two people having dinner. We're two people considering what it might mean to build something together, however tentatively. I think I'd like that too, I say, and the admission feels both terrifying and liberating. The drive home is comfortable, filled with easy conversation about books and movies, plans for the weekend, the first hints of spring in the air. David walks me to my door, and we stand there for a moment in the porch light, neither of us quite ready to end the evening. Thank you for tonight, I say, for the honesty, for the good food, for making this feel less scary than I expected. Thank you for giving me a chance to be honest, and for not running away when I admitted to being an obsessive mountain hiker with unresolved grief issues. I laugh. David, I'm a widow who cries in grocery stores and hasn't figured out how to program her coffee maker timer. We all have issues. He leans in to kiss my cheek again, but this time I turn slightly and his lips brush the corner of my mouth instead. It's barely a kiss, more of an accident than an intention, but it sends electricity through me that I haven't felt in years. We both freeze for a moment, surprised by the contact and the intensity of my reaction to it. "Good night, Eleanor," David says softly, and I can hear something different in his voice, something that matches the flutter in my chest. "Good night, David." I watch him drive away before going inside, touching my lips where his kiss almost landed. In the bathroom mirror, I look like a woman who's been kissed, or almost kissed, flushed and bright-eyed and younger somehow than I was this morning. My phone buzzes with a text from David. "Thank you for a perfect evening. Sweet dreams." I text back, "Thank you for making me feel like myself again." But as I get ready for bed, I realize that's not quite accurate. David isn't making me feel like my old self. He's helping me discover who this new self might be. Eleanor the widow is different from Eleanor the wife, and maybe that's not something to mourn, but something to explore. For the first time in 8 months, I fall asleep thinking about the future instead of the past. Spring arrives early that year, and with it, a routine that develops so naturally I don't notice it forming until it's already established. David calls every Tuesday and Friday. We have dinner once a week, and I've learned to make coffee that rivals anything from the expensive shops downtown. He teaches me to identify birds during our walks through the park, and I introduce him to my book club's monthly selections, which he reads with the same careful attention he applies to hiking trail maps. 3 weeks after our second dinner, he asks if I'd like to try an easy hike, nothing ambitious, just a local trail that loops through the woods behind the community college. I haven't been hiking since college, when Robert and I used to explore the mountains near our campus, but I surprise myself by saying yes. I don't have proper equipment, I warn him. I have an extra day pack and walking sticks. We'll start slow, see how you do. The trail he chooses is perfect for a beginner getting back into hiking, well-maintained, gently graded, with benches placed strategically for rest stops. David sets a pace that challenges me without overwhelming me, and he doesn't comment when I need to stop frequently to catch my breath or admire the early wildflowers blooming along the path. "This is beautiful," I say during one of our rest stops, looking out over a small valley where dogwood trees are beginning to bloom. I'd forgotten how quiet the woods can be. "That's what I love about it," David says, settling on the bench beside me. "In the mountains, you can hear yourself think. All the noise in your head, the worries, the regrets, the endless mental chatter, it just gets absorbed by the trees and the sky until there's space for peace." I understand immediately what he means. The steady rhythm of walking, the focus required to navigate the trail, the beauty of the natural world, it all creates a kind of meditation that I haven't experienced since Robert's illness consumed our lives with appointments and treatments and the daily management of decline. "Is this what you were doing during Helen's cancer treatments? Finding peace in the mountains?" David nods, partly, but also finding strength. There's something about pushing your body to its limits that reminds you what you're capable of surviving. When Helen was getting chemo and I felt helpless and useless, I could go to the mountains and prove to myself that I was still strong, still capable of taking care of business. And now, what do you find in the mountains now? He considers this, looking out over the valley with the contemplative expression I've learned to associate with his most honest moments. Now I find possibility, not the frantic energy of someone trying to outrun grief, but the quieter satisfaction of someone who's ready to see what comes next. We finish the hike in comfortable silence, both of us tired but exhilarated. David drives me home, and I invite him in for coffee, real coffee, properly brewed according to his exacting standards. We sit in my kitchen as the afternoon light fades, tired and happy and covered in trail dust. I haven't felt this good after physical activity in years, I admit, stretching muscles that will definitely be sore tomorrow. Thank you for being patient with my pace. Thank you for being willing to try something new. Helen never liked hiking. She said she didn't see the point of walking for miles just to end up back where you started. It's nice to share it with someone who appreciates it. The comment hangs between us, loaded with significance. This is the first time David has explicitly compared me favorably to Helen, the first acknowledgement that I might offer him something she couldn't or didn't. I'm not sure how to respond, so I pour more coffee and change the subject to our plans for the weekend. But later, after David leaves, I think about his words. I'm not trying to replace Helen in his life, and he's not trying to replace Robert in mine. Instead, we're discovering what we might build together that's entirely our own. The thought excites and terrifies me in equal measure. That night, I call Margaret to update her on my hiking adventure. "Hiking?" she exclaims with delight. "Eleanor, you haven't hiked since you were 25 years old and thought camping was romantic." It was actually wonderful, challenging but not impossible, beautiful but not overwhelming. David was a perfect guide. David's a perfect guide for more than just hiking, Margaret says, with the satisfied tone of a matchmaker whose efforts are bearing fruit. I saw him at the grocery store yesterday, and he was buying ingredients for what looked like a very impressive dinner for two. My heart does a small skip. He hasn't mentioned cooking for me. Maybe he's planning a surprise, or maybe he's working up the courage to take the next step in this courtship of yours. It's not a courtship, Margaret. We're just spending time together. Honey, when a 71-year-old man teaches a woman how to make coffee, takes her hiking, and starts buying ingredients for romantic dinners, it's a courtship. The question is whether you're ready to admit it. After we hang up, I sit with Margaret's words. Am I ready to admit that what David and I are doing constitutes a courtship? The word feels old-fashioned and lovely, suggesting a deliberate, respectful process of getting to know each other with romantic intentions. It's different from the casual dating of younger people, more thoughtful and purposeful. Yes, I realize I am ready to admit it. What's more, I'm ready to participate in it actively, rather than just allowing it to happen to me. The next morning, David calls with an invitation that surprises me. "I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner at my house Friday night. I thought I might cook for you this time, return the favor for all those coffee lessons." "I'd love that," I say, and mean it completely. Fair warning, I'm a much better student than teacher when it comes to cooking. Helen did most of that in our house, but I've been practicing some basic dishes, and I promise not to give you food poisoning. What can I bring? Just yourself, and maybe your sense of humor, in case the meal turns out to be more adventurous than intended. Friday evening finds me standing on David's porch with a bottle of wine and a small bouquet of flowers from my garden, early tulips and daffodils that seemed too cheerful to leave in the yard. He opens the door wearing an apron over his good clothes, looking flustered and endearing. "Perfect timing," he says, accepting the flowers with obvious pleasure. "The chicken just came out of the oven, and I think it's actually edible." His kitchen smells wonderful. herbs and garlic and something lemony that makes my mouth water. The table is set with care, cloth napkins and candles, and what I recognize as his good dishes. He's made chicken with roasted vegetables and some kind of rice pilaf that looks more complicated than anything I would attempt. This is impressive, I say, accepting a glass of wine and studying the spread he's prepared. Are you sure you haven't been secretly taking cooking classes? YouTube, he admits sheepishly, watched about 15 different videos on roasting chicken until I found one that seemed foolproof enough for my skill level. The meal is delicious, if slightly overcooked, and we eat by candlelight while rain patters against the windows. David has put on jazz music, not too loud, just background atmosphere that suggests romance without overwhelming conversation. Everything about the evening feels deliberate, thoughtful, designed to create intimacy. This is lovely, I tell him as we're finishing the main course. Thank you for going to so much trouble. It wasn't trouble. I wanted to do something nice for you, show you that I can take care of you in small ways. The phrase catches my attention. Take care of me? David sets down his fork and looks at me directly. Eleanor, I know we haven't talked about what this is, where it's going, what we want from each other, but I care about you, more than I expected to when Margaret first suggested we meet. I'd like to take care of you in whatever ways you'll let me. The admission hangs between us, honest and vulnerable and impossible to ignore. What does that mean to you? Taking care of me? It means I want to be the person you call when you need help with something heavy or technical. It means I want to teach you things you want to learn and learn things you want to teach me. It means I want to be your person for the small daily kindnesses that make life easier and more pleasant. I feel tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, but from the unexpected relief of being seen, being wanted, being offered partnership instead of just companionship. I'd like that too. I'd like to take care of you as well, in whatever ways you'd let me. What would that look like for you? I consider the question, thinking about what David might need that I could provide. It means I want to be the person who remembers that you like your coffee strong and your hiking boots waterproofed. It means I want to read the books you recommend and share the ones I love. It means I want to be your person for conversation and comfort and the kind of companionship that makes everything else feel possible. David reaches across the table and takes my hand, not briefly this time, but deliberately, turning it over to trace the lines on my palm. Eleanor, I think I'm falling in love with you. Not the desperate love of young people who think they can't survive without each other, but the grateful love of adults who know how rare it is to find someone who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. The words hit me like a physical force, knocking the breath from my lungs, not because they're unwelcome, but because they're so exactly what I needed to hear, so perfectly expressed, so honest about the complexity of love at our age. I think I'm falling in love with you too, I whisper, and the admission feels like stepping off a cliff into something vast and unknowable and wonderful. David stands and comes around the table, pulling me up into his arms for a real kiss this time, not accidental, not hesitant, but full and warm and certain. His lips are soft, his hands gentle on my face, and when we break apart, I feel breathless and young and terrified and exhilarated all at once. Now what? I ask, because I genuinely don't know what happens next. Now we figure it out together, David says, and kisses me again. What happens next is both simpler and more complicated than I expected. We don't rush into anything dramatic, no immediate declarations of exclusive commitment, no conversations about moving in together, no grand gestures that would overwhelm the delicate thing we're building. Instead, we settle into the careful dance of two people learning to love again while honoring the loves we've lost. David starts staying later when he comes for dinner, helping me with dishes and lingering on my couch for conversation that stretches well into the evening. I begin spending Saturday afternoons at his house, reading while he works in his garden, comfortable with shared silence in a way that surprises us both. We take longer hikes, venturing beyond the local trails to explore state parks and mountain paths that require more planning and commitment. The physical intimacy develops slowly, thoughtfully. Kisses become longer, more frequent, but we both seem to understand that rushing would damage something precious. We hold hands during movies, curl up together on the couch while reading, exchange casual touches that speak of growing comfort with each other's bodies. But we maintain separate bedrooms, separate homes, separate spaces to retreat to when the intensity of new love becomes overwhelming. I feel like a teenager, I confessed to Sarah during one of our weekly phone calls. Except instead of worrying about what my parents will think, I'm worrying about what my daughter will think. Sarah laughs. Mom, I just want you to be happy. And from the way you sound lately, lighter, more like yourself, I think David is good for you. He is, but it's also terrifying, caring about someone new. What if something happens to him? What if I lose him like I lost your father? I don't think I could survive that kind of grief again. Oh, Mom, Sarah's voice softens with understanding. You can't protect yourself from loss by refusing to love. Dad wouldn't want that for you, and neither do I. The risk of pain is the price of joy. Her words stay with me through the following weeks as David and I navigate the delicate negotiations of mature love. We talk about our fears, not just the abstract fear of loss, but the practical concerns of aging bodies and fixed incomes and adult children who might not approve of their parents' romantic adventures. We discuss our expectations, how much togetherness we want, how much independence we need, what role we might play in each other's families and social circles. My son is coming to visit next month, David tells me one evening as we're walking through the park. I'd like him to meet you if you're comfortable with that. The invitation represents a significant escalation in our relationship, moving from private courtship to public acknowledgement, from careful exploration to genuine integration of our lives. What have you told him about me? That I've been spending time with a wonderful woman named Eleanor who makes me laugh and challenges me to try new things. That I care about you and would like him to know you. What if he doesn't approve? What if he thinks I'm trying to replace his mother? David stops walking and turns to face me. Eleanor, my son is 45 years old and happily married. He wants me to be happy, not to spend the rest of my life alone as a shrine to his mother's memory. And if he doesn't approve, that's his problem to work through, not ours. The certainty in his voice reassures me, but I still feel nervous about the meeting. What do you wear to meet your boyfriend's adult son? How do you present yourself as a worthy companion to their beloved parent without seeming presumptuous about your place in his life? I needn't have worried. Michael turns out to be a gentle, thoughtful man who clearly adores his father and wants only his happiness. He asks me thoughtful questions about my children and my interests, shares stories about David's hiking adventures that reveal his pride in his father's resilience, and treats me with the respect due to someone important to his dad. He's been different since he started seeing you, Michael tells me privately while David is in the kitchen preparing coffee. More like himself, if that makes sense. After Mom died, he kind of retreated into this careful, controlled version of Dad. With you, he seems more relaxed, more willing to take up space in the world again. The observation touches me deeply because I recognize the same change in myself. With David, I'm not the careful, diminished version of Eleanor who emerged from widowhood. I'm more myself. Curious, opinionated, willing to take risks and try new things. 2 weeks later, I return the favor by introducing David to Sarah when she comes for her monthly visit. I'm more nervous about this meeting because Sarah has been protective of me since Robert's death and because her approval feels more crucial to my happiness than Michael's approval feels to David's. Sarah arrives with her usual efficiency, hugging me and immediately beginning her maternal assessment of my well-being. Am I eating enough, sleeping well, taking my vitamins, managing my finances responsibly? But when David arrives for our planned dinner, I watch her watching him, noting his gentle manners, his obvious affection for me, his respectful interest in her life and work. Mom looks happy, Sarah tells David over dessert, and the simple statement carries the weight of blessing. She makes me happy too, David replies, reaching for my hand across the table in a gesture so natural I don't even think about it until later. After dinner, Sarah pulls me aside while David is saying goodbye. I like him, Mom, really like him. He treats you like you're precious, but not fragile. There's a difference. What difference? Precious means he values you, wants to take care of you, appreciates what you bring to his life. Fragile would mean he thinks you can't handle life on your own, that you need rescuing. This is precious. Her distinction helps me understand something I've been feeling but couldn't articulate about my relationship with David. He doesn't see me as a broken woman who needs fixing, but as a whole person worthy of love and care. In return, I don't see him as a replacement for Robert, but as a new adventure in partnership. That night, after Sarah has returned to her hotel and David has gone home, I sit in my kitchen with a cup of perfectly brewed coffee and take stock of my life. 6 months ago, I was a woman disappearing into widowhood, shrinking into a smaller and smaller version of myself. Tonight, I'm a woman in love, planning hiking trips and dinner parties, learning new skills, and rediscovering old pleasures. The transformation hasn't erased my grief for Robert or eliminated the challenges of aging alone. But it has given me something I didn't expect to have again. A future worth planning for, a reason to take care of myself, someone to share the daily accumulation of small joys and minor disasters that make up a life. My phone buzzes with a text from David. "Thank you for letting me meet Sarah. She's wonderful, and I can see where you get your strength and warmth. Sweet dreams, my dear Eleanor." I text back, "Thank you for being someone worth introducing to my daughter. Sleep well, my dear David." The endearments are new, tentative, but they feel right. We're building our own language of affection, our own rituals of care, our own version of partnership that honors what we've lost while celebrating what we found.